Welcome to Podcast for Fun. This is the show where we dive into the passion, the process, and the journeys of creative storytellers as they bring their stories to life. I'm your host, Sophia, and today we are joined by a talented writer, H. German. Thank you so much for being here, Harold.
Thank you for having me, Sophia. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So, let's start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and your work.
Okay, well, I work for Sigma Comics. We are a publisher dedicated to fighting animal cruelty through comics and manga. So we have a title called Here Comes Calico, and we also have it available as a comic book and a manga. And we have a new title coming out very soon called Green-Eyed Bandito. And with those two titles, we address the horrible blight on society that is animal cruelty.
So, when did you start writing comics?
I started writing comics in the early part of 2020, which was right at the beginning of the pandemic.
Mhm.
Everything was shut down. If you notice from my accent and also from my hat, I am a New Yorker, and this was sort of ground zero for COVID.
Mhm.
And I was actually training for some sport competitions. I used to be a professional fighter,
Oh, wow.
and yeah, so. I was training and I was getting ready for my fights, and my fights were ready. And I was getting calls from each of the promotions saying that the fights were all canceled due to COVID.
Mhm.
And I was very upset, obviously, because I had trained very hard for these fights. And the person I was dating at the time, she had just gotten a book deal from Simon and Schuster, one of the big, major publishers.
Mhm.
And you know, sort of on a whim, she said, "Hey, that animal lover idea that you have that you keep on the shelf. Why don't you get it off the shelf now that you've got some time? Everything's shut down. There's really nothing to do except for exercise your creativity, right?" So, and I did. I listened to her and I got it off of the shelf. And as I wrote the outline for a novel, really, which is what it was supposed to be, it became clear to me that the character Calico really lent himself as a really cool sort of, superhero or anti-hero comic book character or manga. And I decided to, explore that route. And sure enough, it became a comic book series and then eventually a manga series. So
How did you
yeah.
find your artist for your comic?
I went on a couple of places. One place is called Deviant Art, and another one is called ArtStation.
Mhm.
And I looked at portfolios specific to comic book and manga panels, right? So a lot of people who are in the arts, specifically illustration, cartooning, or even just people who like to draw, uh, they sort of amass a portfolio of a few really nice cover shots. And really, that's not the way to do it. You really need to do panel work. You really need to look at doing panels.
Mhm.
And it's really the panel art and the pages that you do that are going to be more insightful to someone who's going to hire you for comics or manga. Because I don't want to say anybody can do a nice, one set image, but it's very important as an artist to be able to story tell,
Mhm.
right? And you can digest that as a recipient of art and as a fan of art by looking at how well the artist is able to depict or tell a story, right? And that's what I was looking for. And through that, I found our first interior artist, which was Javier Orovich. And then, of course, using that same process, Renato Pinto, who's our current artist. I did the same thing for the cover artist, but slightly different, right? Because now, for the cover artist, now we are looking for that one set sort of image, those poster powerful images that are going to sort of stop you in your tracks. And that's really the responsibility of the publisher, right? We need to make sure that the cover is a showstopper. It's going to stop that person regardless of where they're at, whether they're at a manga bookstore, they're at a Walmart, they're at a comic book shop, they're at a convention. What you want to do in hiring that cover artist is that artist that can, through their art, stop a person walking in their tracks and be like, whoa, look at that. Like I have to buy that. I have to get that. And that's what I was able to do. It's a different selection process, a cover artist versus an interior artist. The interior artist is the storyteller, and the cover artist is the showstopper.
So, what would you say is like the traits of a good interior artist?
Well, as I mentioned, the first one and the most important thing in my view is storytelling, right?
Yeah.
You can have a great artist that whose art blows you away, but if they can't tell a story, then it's just a bunch of pictures. It's collage,
Mhm.
right? I can use examples, but I don't want to insult any artists out
No, it's
there.
totally fine.
Um, well, listen, I'll give you an example. All right. So if you want to take it into comic books, there's an artist who gets enormous praise and rightly so because he's incredibly talented in comics. His
Mhm.
name is Alex Ross. Okay. The art is absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful stuff. It's a thing of beauty, right? And they are showstoppers, right?
Mhm.
The problem is uh, all of the pieces of art that he creates, they're very sort of ethereal and in many cases out of place with what he's actually trying to communicate. The work has this sort of still version to it. They're all like still paintings, and trying to tell a comic book story, especially comics, it's full of action, comics and manga. You really
Mhm.
need to have a fluidity that is more in sync with the narrative, right? And for me, again, art is subjective. For me, I don't think his art does that. I think he's a great cover artist, and that's why Marvel and DC hire him to do these incredible, gorgeously painted, covers. But when
Mhm.
you actually look at the art inside, I think Kingdom Gone is one of the books that he did for DC. Again, a gorgeous book, absolutely gorgeous. And again, he deserves all the credit. It's just from my personal taste and view, I just don't think he's a great storyteller. So I would not hire him as an interior artist. I would hire him. I would run. In fact, I would dive to hire him as a cover artist.
Yeah.
So again, I don't want to insult any artist. Again, this is just my personal preference. And, my favorite artist of all time is Todd McFarlane. Todd McFarlane, who used to draw, Spider-Man and the Hulk back in like the late 80s, early 90s. Wow, that guy was he was incredible. And he definitely was a showstopper. But then he did have that storytelling capability
Mhm.
in terms of adding that motion, the fluidity, to really keep the reader excited. And pairing him with a great writer, that's just. I mean, I don't care. I don't know what your favorite food is, but I can assure you that Todd McFarlane, paired with an incredible writer like Peter David or like Alan, Moore, or Frank Miller. I mean, that's just that's heaven. So, yeah.
What is your favorite fictional piece, you'd say?
Boy, you got the good questions there, Sophia. It's really hard. Uh, I would have to say, I'm a huge, huge, huge Spider-Man fan. Love Spider-Man, but very important, but I think the best thing I think I've ever read was Batman Year One, and that was Frank Miller. It's really the story of, the first year that Batman is sort of, donning the cape and the cowl and being Batman. It's really rough. I see a lot of there are a lot of there is a lot of inspiration between our character, let's say my comics, the Calico.
Yeah.
The Calico has been doing this job for 8 years, where we pick up the story and here comes Calico. But there's still a lot of things he doesn't know. He's not the best fighter, but he's a good one.
Yeah.
And, like Batman, he doesn't have superpowers. He's just a normal guy. Now, that said, he is, a great athlete. So that helps. And the suit definitely does help. But there are a lot of challenges that Batman has to overcome in that first year, and he Batman year one. And Frank Miller, the writer on that book, just does an incredible job. Denny Miller is the editor, and Dave Mazzucchelli is the artist. And he has this sort of what a storyteller he is. I mean, again, I mentioned combining great story with great art. Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli on Batman Year One is a captivating read, absolutely. So, yeah.
What's an example of like a hardship that Batman had to go through that you feel was depicted really well?
Well, navigating that first layer of authority, right? The cops are the first level of authority in society,
Yeah.
right? So here you are, a new supposed hero, and somehow you have to get over that hump. The cops are like, if you ever see that movie with Tom Hanks, Castaway, when he's on the island. Did you ever see that movie, Castaway?
I need to watch it, but I love Tom Hanks and I've heard of that movie. Could you describe it to me?
Well, he's a very it starts off he's a very busy guy that works for the US. I think it's FedEx, like one
Mhm.
of the carriers, the private carriers in the States. And it's just he's this married guy. He's very busy. He's too busy for everything in his life. And then his plane has an accident and it crashes and he's the only survivor. And
Mhm.
he makes it onto this island. And over the course of I don't know how long, but it's a long time, years, I think, he survives. And he lives off the vegetation, he lives off the fish, and he just becomes his life goes from this crazy hectic metropolitan rat race life to this just like survival and being one with nature.
Mhm.
And the he has daily challenges, infection, right, illness because of the climate, uh, the sun. There's so many different things but he's trying to get away from the island. He makes his mind. He says, listen, I'm just going to go for it. And the most difficult part was getting over that first set of sort of coastal waves
Mhm.
that will always try to keep pushing you back. And that's sort of like the cops, as a hero, because they're important. They're an important part of the topography, right, of the island and everything around you. As our cops are an important part of society, right?
Mhm.
But your justice is a little different, just like Batman's,
Yeah.
right? So I think that was the really biggest challenge, and he's doing it again, not as a superhero. He's doing it as a regular guy with a suit on, and he has to overcome somehow that level of innate, justice as we know it in society to be able to act outside of,
Mhm.
that wave of authority, which is the cops. So I really think that that was the first really big challenge, outside of his personal demons, because
Mhm.
the Batman character is a very complex, right, character. But for me, it was how Batman interacts in society that was really interesting because really that's the functional Batman.
Mhm.
Introspection is one thing, and how you are formed and your psyche and your morals and all those things. And in that sense, Batman is an incredible story on its own. But how the character Batman interacts with society and how practical and effective his heroism can be, he had to get over through the cop layer, to sort of cement his brand of justice. I thought that was fascinating.
Do you feel like elements of that are present in your comic book as well?
Sure, you could say that. Again, there's a lot of similarities actually with Batman. I mean, Batman, Bruce Wayne is a rich sort of, single bachelor type guy, and
Yeah.
he dedicates his life to fighting crime, and it's very personal to him because his family was murdered right in front
Mhm.
of him, and that caused a very deep-seated trauma that he was never able to shake.
Mhm.
And part of his development as the character known as Batman is addressing that trauma each and every single second of the day, by bringing the bad guys to justice. In the Calico sense, again, to draw a parallel, Calico is definitely not rich. He's just a regular street guy from the Bronx in New York, and he's actually a criminal, as opposed to Bruce Wayne. He starts out, he's a criminal, and he's a really good one. He's sort of a cat burglar,
Mhm.
and at some point something tragic happens to him. I don't want to give it away for those of you who
Yeah.
rather enjoy it yourself. And, it causes trauma to him. And that trauma causes him to um, lose faith in people. And when he loses faith in people, he realizes that the beings that have been closest and dearest to him have been animals. And he dedicates his life to, the welfare and safety of animals. So he
Mhm.
basically devotes his entire life to just, taking care of, saving animals. And that's the calico. He's the ultimate defender of animals.
So you said that you wrote this story because you love animals, right?
Yeah, right.
Where does this loving for animals come from?
Well, I think it's a tiered love, right? I think that for me, I have always recognized the tenderness and sincerity and purity of animals since I was young. And, I think the first thing we as boys and girls, growing up, see in animals that's sort of shocking is how much more advanced physically they are than humans. I mean, animals can fly. I mean, they can
Yeah.
climb trees and buildings and all kinds of things, and you're just like, whoa, you're doing things that we see in comic books. It's like awe-inspiring. I don't know about you, but I've never seen a human being flying, like unassisted,
Yeah.
right? Like in this, and I've never seen one, jumping, like 10 times their size, like cats do. It's
Mhm.
incredible stuff. They're little superheroes, right?
Yeah.
So I think, as a child and, with our imagination, we see these creatures like, whoa, and then they're cute and cuddly. I mean, it's a great combination. So I think it started with just being in awe of them.
So how long was that story like marinating in your mind until you flourished it?
Great question. You ask good questions.
Thank.
Um, yeah. Yeah. So, for me, yeah, well, I've always enjoyed animals. I've always loved them. I think for me, um, certainly the way I write, I'm someone who writes what I know,
Mhm.
right? So I'm not gonna, there's many different types of writers out there. There's muscular writers who focus on sort
Muscular.
of yeah, muscular writers really focus on the composition of the word and on the page and elicit sort of this emotion from you. You have very descriptive writers that are so succinct in their descriptions that you can smell the room you're in on the page. Like a J.K. Rowling is great, right? Very
Mhm.
descriptive writer. I guess for me, I'm someone that very experiential. I write what I know. I've gone through quite a few experiences. I mentioned I used to be a fighter,
Yes.
and not just a fighter, but a fighter from New York. I used to be a boxer, an MMA fighter. So I let that's just to say that I have a lot of stories. I've been through a lot of experiences in life. So I think I've married a lot of the experiences with my creativity. I did go to art school. So I
Mhm.
went to the School of Visual Arts in New York City. And because I have this sort of strong creative foundation, I had great teachers, and I took many creative writing classes, especially my junior and sophomore, excuse me, my junior and senior year.
Mhm.
Um, I had the ability to construct these narratives, these stories that are very entertaining, and I think that's the essence of a really good manga and comic book. Sometimes today's creators forget that you really have to entertain. That's, in my view, the most important part of comic book and manga storytelling. You really have to entertain people.
Mhm.
You start to see a little problem there in the world of comics, but manga is going very strong because I think they recognize you have to entertain the reader. So
What do you mean by entertain? Like what kind of traits define entertaining?
right. So really anything that can capture your attention as a reader completely so that
Mhm.
you forget where you are. You're in a room there in a
Mhm.
bedroom, and a good writer can take you away from that bedroom, right? The job of every writer, in my opinion, every writer and artist, by the way, is to the moment the second that your finger touches the page, they should be creating a window in the room, whatever room you're in. Even if you're outside, their
Mhm.
job is to create that window and take you outside of wherever you are and into their world, right? Um, there's lots of ways you can do that. So I mentioned J.K. Rowling, the writer for the Harry Potter series,
Mhm.
and she just does an amazing job at that. The minute that you're reading the first or second paragraph, you're already, on that train station, ready to go into Hogwarts or whatever, or wherever it is that
Mhm.
she's having you go. But that's our responsibility. And entertainment is, in my view, job one. And how you do it is you capture whatever it is. It could be a location, it could be focusing deeply on the character to the point where you are so invested in what they're doing and what's going on in their lives that you just keep doing this. You keep flipping. This is entertainment. As long as you keep doing this on the page or like this on the tablet,
Yeah.
then we are doing our job absolutely as creatives.
So if you knew you were always creative and you went to visual arts school, why did you become a fighter?
Uh, well, I grew up in the Bronx. Very easy answer. I grew up in the Bronx.
What do you mean?
I grew up
How?
I grew up in a Italian neighborhood in the Bronx.
Mm,
And it was a bumpy ride. I'm Latino, I'm Hispanic, I'm Dominican, and you know, this was back in the 80s, and you know, in New York, especially the Bronx and in that area, there are a lot of cultures living, next to each other, but some areas aren't, some neighborhoods are entirely of one group. And you're always going to have, some kids that aren't going to play as friendly, with you as other kids. So you just had to learn how to be tough. And of course, the Bronx is known, is renowned. In fact, it's infamous for being one of the toughest, most dangerous places, in the country, if not the world. So it's important to learn how to defend yourself very, very early. And
mm.
I did that. And what happens is once you learn how to defend yourself in the Bronx or in Brooklyn, that's another, pretty tough place. You pick up sort of innate traits and abilities, and when you get good enough, you can get called into a boxing gym, and the rest is history.
So you got called into the boxing gym?
You got called into the boxing gym. Hey, you're getting in too many fights, and I think you should do that stuff in the ring. And eventually, I learned how to hone the craft, how to throw punches, how to move my head and defend myself. And you gain a lot of confidence when you're
Mm,
able to do that because it's a tool. And then the responsibility that comes with the training, right? Because it's not just fighting, there's this training
yeah.
involved. And the training is really a big part of it to the point where whatever aggression, anger, rage, drove you to be a fighter or lack thereof, um, gets molded into this efficient unit that powers you throughout your day and throughout your life and can be a very practical tool. Um, this is why boxing, kickboxing, MMA, whatever it is recommended to kids that have problems
Mm,
with violence and fighting and whatnot. You'd think it was sort of counterintuitive, right? It's like, why are you going to put these kids in there to fight? Well, it's the best thing they can do because the training over time, they realize how much investment goes into this. Okay, and the body, you have to have the mind, body, spirit connection in order to keep putting out repetition, repetition, discipline, discipline. The more you practice and become disciplined, the more you hone in all those emotional energies, physical, mental, and you become very balanced and focused on delivering acute offense and defense. And that is why it's almost always recommended to kids in inner cities who have, problems with fighting because they realize how much goes into it. And the truth is they almost always calm down.
mm. I do agree. I feel like it's important for people to know how to defend themselves,
Right,
right?
right. And if you look at any manga, comic, it's good versus evil. It's combat, right? It's conflict. The essence of any manga or, comic book story is conflict, right?
Yeah.
There's either some good or some bad or something that's fighting against something else. And it's that struggle that creates the tension and the excitement and the entertainment, right? So, yeah, absolutely.
So how long did it take for you to shift from being a fighter to a writer?
Oh, they were both going on at the same time. You can be both. I was fighting since I was a kid, and I was drawing since I was a kid. I even had little comic books, in my neighborhood.
Oh
I have a
wow.
dual upbringing. Yeah, I have a dual upbringing. I grew up in the Dominican Republic and in New York, in the Bronx.
Mhm.
I was born here in New York, but I spent pretty much every summer in the Dominican Republic. And I also went to school there for a couple of years. So even as a kid, I was drawing little comic books. I remember the comic books that I drew here in the US. Uh, they focused on a character who was from the South, and
Mhm.
he always had like a little, weed in his lip, and he spoke really funny, and he did all sorts of crazy stuff. And then in the Dominican Republic, I drew it was the adventures of Missouri. And Missouri was my cat in the Dominican Republic, or my grandparents' cat.
Mhm.
And Missouri was a black and white cat, and I would draw Missouri in all these little adventures. And I would do a loose leaf page, and I would sort of split up the loose leaf page in like, eight, panels, and I would do the Missouri comic book. And then when I was done, I would, spread it around to all my little friends in the neighborhood, and they got a kick out of it. And of course, Missouri was the most popular cat then, in the neighborhood because everybody was reading his comic book.
That's so cute.
Yeah.
So how did you manage writing and fighting? Like, how did you keep yourself so self-motivated?
Right. So I was not writing, and just to clarify, I was not writing comic books professionally. Um, in my teens or 20s. I
Mhm.
just started doing that in 2020, in the beginning of the COVID
Oh
pandemic.
yeah, yeah.
As so I was in school and I was still fighting in the School of Visual Arts. In fact, I think I was the only athlete, professional athlete, definitely in the
Mhm.
School of Visual Arts because it doesn't have a sports program.
Yeah.
And so I was fighting at the same time while going to school. And I would work little part-time jobs here, like at a clothing store. And
Oh
yeah,
my God.
yeah, it was rough. It was crazy. But when I graduated, I worked on, Madison Avenue. I worked at ad agencies.
Mhm.
So um I didn't go into comics as a professional. I went into advertising. It was
Mhm.
only in the pandemic that I sort of circled back into, writing comic books. So a passion I had as a kid. So
So, how did you go about trying to become a comic professional? Like, what did you have a game plan or just gonna, just happened?
it just happened because, like I said, I really thought that this animal lover concept was really going to be a novel,
Mhm.
and there's still possibly plans to put it out as a novel as well. But in working on the outline, it basically was birthed as a comic book series, and then as a manga. So that's really the beginning of it. But as a result, I didn't have a plan to be a comic book creator. It was really due to practical need, right?
Mhm.
If I'm going to put this out as a comic book, then I have to sort of just, learn how to do this by doing. I didn't have any formal training as a comic book creator. Now, of course, I had a great education because I
Mhm.
went to the School of Visual Arts, foundation drawing and writing. So I had all of the foundational things that are required of a
Yeah.
comic book creator, but certainly not from a publishing standpoint because comic books and manga are a business.
Yeah.
Okay, that's another thing that a lot of creatives don't realize. We're business people when we get to the publisher level because we need to understand the mathematics of putting out a book in a market and how
Yeah.
well it's going to do in different markets, right? So let's take Here Comes Calico as an example, right?
Mhm.
So one of our biggest markets isn't even in comic book readers, it's in animal lovers, people who love animals. And they realize that the calico is the ultimate defender of animals. And they walk by our booth or at a shop or something. It's like, oh my goodness, this is dedicated to fighting animal cruelty. Absolutely. Let me support this, right?
Mhm.
So as a publisher, as a business person, I need to know that I have a market for that. And so we have to research how well does, pet supplies, animal related products support, how well do they do? Where could we plug that in? Comic books, where do those go? Manga, how well does that do in the US versus whatever other markets we're going to be in? So these are all important things. What is this going to cost? What's paper doing? Right? Today we're in 2025, right? So there are new business protocols, right? New expenses that we didn't have perhaps last year.
Mhm.
All those things have to be factored in as a business person in comics and manga to understand how it is that you're going to, survive doing this, right? So in our case, we work strictly with animal rights charities. Even though we are not a charity ourselves, we work strictly with charities. So our main focus is in profit. It's in spreading the message
Mhm.
of fighting animal cruelty. And that's why people say, oh my God, how is it that these guys price their comic books at $2.50? This is incredible. Or our manga is only, $8 or whatever it is. Well, that's because we're not trying to make, yeah, we're trying to make money because we're a for-profit company. But that's not our first job. Our first job is spreading the message of fighting and combating animal cruelty, animal abuse. All
Mhm.
right. So could we price our comic books at $5 or 6 like a lot of other people do? Sure, we could do that. But, you know, uh, what we want to do is make sure that we keep spreading the message of our vetted charities like the Animal Welfare Institute, who do an
Mhm.
enormous job and are indeed vetted to ensure that their program to operations ratio is 80 to 20,
Mhm.
or even better, where the CEO doesn't make $10 million, like some of these other charities out there that claim to be doing great things for animals, right?
Mhm.
So, this is another layer that we have that other publishers do not have. That's our reality as a comic book publisher. So with respect to the business of comics and how that's done, our model is a bit different than others. But you have to make sure that you're on top of your game um, with respect to numbers and finances to keep doing what you're doing. So there's your answer for us at least. And I'm sure it's going to be different for someone else.
No, I think that's smart though. You know exactly who your target audience is.
We have to. We have to because it's a business. And there are publishers out there, maybe not publishers, but there are creators out there that go on their own that don't have a publisher mindset. They have a creator mindset, and they may not necessarily have that in mind first, right?
Mhm.
So for us, it's more about a message, right? And then it's about making sure that we have the right team to support that creatively, and then ensure that we have revenue coming in so that we can continue doing this, right? We can continue putting out the stories, supporting the charities, right?
Mhm.
And getting the message out, and then building our brand, which is Sigma Comics,
Mhm.
dedicated to fighting animal abuse. So it's really three jobs that we have. One is the message. One is ensuring that we're afloat financially so that we can keep doing and supporting our creators.
Mhm.
And the third one is to make sure that we're growing our brand. Hopefully one day we can do something even bigger than comics and manga. And that's always, the goal is to be bigger, go outside and continuously challenge, those boundaries so you can just become boundless, right?
Yes.
Your brand becomes boundless and you just keep growing and growing. And definitely that's always the dream.
So what kind of things are you hoping to get beyond comics?
Oh, that's the yummy, exciting part.
Yeah.
Well, well, just imagine this, Sophie. Imagine this.
Mhm.
Imagine a calico anime, okay, on like Netflix or
Mhm.
Amazon or Hulu or HBO, right? That would be awesome to see
Yes.
Hector Gill, the calico, going after people who abuse animals and kicking the crap out of them. Oh, that would be fantastic. And if that's the case, there would be, in my view, if we had an anime, it would be insane. Like people would go crazy because there's
Mhm.
nothing like Calico, nothing like Calico out there. We have the trademark, the copyright on the Calico, all
Mhm.
right, and we have the tenure and the track record. This is our fifth year. And we've been going out all around the continent with Calico. Uh, next month, yeah, next month I'll be in London.
Mhm.
So we will be outside of the continent. So we're global officially. Well, I guess we're global officially now because we do get orders that come in from all around the world, Japan, England, Australia, everywhere, Singapore. So we are everywhere now, but in a very micro level. I think
Yeah.
once for instance, if we had an anime, yeah, boom, everybody. in global exposure, especially
Yeah.
on networks like, Hulu and Netflix and HBO. I really think that the right the right network for us would be something like perhaps like an HBO, I think, because the the Calico's not a superhero. He's an anti-hero. He's
Mhm.
very much he sort of crosses the boundaries there between, hero and villain quite a few times. And it's a pretty seedy story. It's not for young children. For that,
Mhm.
we have another story, Green Eye Bandito. But Hector Gill's pretty intense, and he's
Mhm.
a rough hombre, and he might be a little too hot for Netflix and some of these other what do you call these streaming giants. So I think maybe well, we'll see. I don't know. We haven't crossed that bridge, and hopefully we do. Those would be good problems to have, deciding which which network to go on with Calico.
I wish you luck because I want to see it on screen. I
Heck
love
yeah.
anime. But do you think it's better like animated or live action?
I think we should go animated first because I think that the artistry of Here Comes Calico is really fun. It's a really quirky, seedy, street sort of edgy New York City that you don't see often in comics, which you get to
Mhm.
see in the comic book. You get to see, instead of Midtown, which is always like where these superhero stories are, shown in comics and manga, you
Mhm.
get to see Bensonhurst, Bed-Stuy, Pelham Bay in the Bronx, Arthur Avenue, Hunts Point. These are all like very seedy, historically, areas, or if not seedy, sort of rugged and tough blue collar. It's a more textured interpretation that you get in the comics. And I think that's frankly, I think it's one of the impressive things about the comic. I told all of our artists, I said, listen, if we're going to take you on board, you need to understand this very important thing. In addition to drawing Hector, the Calico,
Mhm.
and doing a great job there, the second most important character in the series is New York City, and all the grit and grime. So you really need to uh, impart that edgy, gritty street, atmosphere, and give it that sort of modern noir and
Yeah.
dirty noir
Mhm.
that our readers really, really love us for. And I honestly think that, sure, while you can do that in film, I think that you can truly engage the imagination creatively on with the animation there.
Mhm.
And and the truth is it's more cost effective to go the animation route than the big screen, right?
Yeah.
So or even like a series, a live
Mhm.
action series.
Mhm.
So I think that baby steps for us is just getting the comics out, getting them to as many hands as possibly can, the comics and manga,
Mhm.
and hopefully the grass the root the grassroots movement takes hold as well as it should, and it is, frankly. We sell out in pretty much every convention that we go to. We just came from C2E2 and
Mhm.
knocked the doors off of that in Artist Alley. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And this is our second sellout in a row. Before that was Fan Expo Cleveland, and we just have. I think we're the only comic book publisher that consistently sells out. A comic book and manga publisher that sells out everywhere we go. And we bring between 200 and 300 pounds of comics and manga everywhere we go. And regardless, in 3 days, we're always sold out. So it's definitely working very nicely. So all we need is a little more time, a little more experience, and hopefully, knock on, plastic or whatever this is. You
Mhm.
know, one day we'll get that call. Hey, I think it's time to go for an anime here. And I think that's the next step, and that's very exciting, frankly.
I'm excited for you. Oh my gosh, that's literally my dream too. Except I'm like 500 steps behind, but I'll get there hopefully. But that's
Just make
another.
sure listen, just get nice, comfortable sneakers so the steps, become nice and comfortable. Make sure your diet is good. You're drinking lots of water and you're energizing, you're eating. There you go. You're eating as much as possible. all the energy.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of being successful in any endeavor is making sure that you're taking care of yourself first, right? You have to make sure you're exercising, eating, because it's a lot of work. Today I should have gone to the gym. I should have walked, but I had a lot of things going on. But tomorrow I will. Tomorrow I will go. So
I'm
I'm
sure
I'm
you will.
working. Yeah, I'm working on our Kickstarter right now. So that's why I wasn't able to do anything. We have a Kickstarter coming out on May
Mhm.
1st. So
May 1st, Kickstarter.
yes,
For a new book,
yes,
right?
yes. So usually what we have on our table, if you see us at conventions, we will have our individual comic books, which are only $2.50 each. And then we also have our manga series. And those manga tankobons are in, standard tankobon volume, black and white. And then we also have the trade books. And those are, 200 pages plus, and they comprise, the whole run. The first run was called Calico Street Math, which was like issues 1 through 8. And in the manga, volume 1 through 4. And now we have a new book coming out, which is book 2, and that's
Mhm.
Calico Morality Play. And Morality Play has, another couple hundred pages there. And that's going to be like issues 9 to 14 or, you know, volume, 5 to 7 or whatever. Right.
Mhm.
So, and that's going to be collected in a nice trade paperback. And we will kickstart it on Kickstarter on May 1st. So, uh, maybe we can send you the link there to sign up because we do have it available.
Yes. You can
All
put it in the
right.
description.
Great. Yep. We'll put it on the description and please go there and sign up. The link will be active now. It's just that that's going to be the sign up for the Kickstarter. And then on May 1st, of course, then it turns on and you can actually start pre-ordering. But you could
Mhm.
sign on now. So we really appreciate it in our fight against animal cruelty.
Yes. So, Harold, I have one final question.
Sure.
What's one advice you give to the aspiring storytellers watching right now?
Okay, so I think this was the best one for me and my sort of perspective because it's what I do and it's write what you know.
Mhm.
Right? So what does that mean? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go out now and become a professional fighter or anything like that. But read. Go out there and I've heard it said that you really shouldn't pick up a pen to start becoming a writer until you're like 40 and you've lived some life. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think that you just have to go out and have experiences. Don't necessarily live a sheltered life.
Mhm.
Go outside of your home and meet people, have experiences, because you're going to start learning about life in a different way than you do, just being on your own all the time. And you can have experiences anywhere you are, even inside too, but it's always whenever you're able to touch nature and, other people and animals, whatever it is, you're able to have reactions and experiences. And that's what life is a bunch of experiences, right? And
Mhm.
then they can become experiments, right? So that would be even more interesting, right? So if life gives you experiences, then why don't you go ahead and give it experiments and see what door they take you through, right? So
Now you're convincing me to leave my house more. I love it so much. Well, that's a wrap for today's episode of Podcast for Fun. Thank you so much, Harold, for joining us and sharing your incredible insights. That was so fun.
my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And everybody get out there to sigmacomics.com. That's our website. Support the fight against animal abuse. And you could also pre-order the latest book, Calico Morality Play, and that's on Kickstarter on the link there in the description.
Yes. And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with literally everybody. Fellow storytelling enthusiasts, people who like comics, people who like manga, they'll all enjoy this. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to explore, you can drop them in the comments or connect with me on any of my social medias at Podcast for Fun. Until next time, keep creating, keep dreaming, and we'll see you on the next episode of Podcast for Fun.